Online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Oh, isn't this curious? Governor of California, Gavin Newsom, praised the White House for bailing out SVB Bank. Neglected to inform the public that he benefited from the deal. His wife got a $100,000 charitable donation from SVB in 2021. SVB gave Black Lives Matter, guess how much money?
$73 million.
$75 million.
Oh, I was almost there.
Yeah, but Gavin Newsom has invested in some 3 wine companies that bank at SVB.
Yeah. So he never disclosed that?
No, just minor detail.
What's his party label? I don't know. He's Democrat.
Yeah.
Oh, so it doesn't matter.
But Signature Bank New York also collapsed.
From Signature Bank here in Chicago.
Yeah, did you hear what
I heard the
ABC News did?
Yeah.
ABC News put the logo for Signature Bank Chicago, our good friend Kevin Bastuga. Their bank is fine.
Correct.
Signature Bank New York, well, they like to make videos, big, large productions, comedy routines, as well as singing, and there's a lot of show choir and jazz hands involved.
Look, the only way we're going to do this thing is if we
start a
bank from scratch.
From scratch? You got to be kidding.
How in the world do you do that? Is there a book, How to Build a Bank for Dummies?
All we have to do is apply to 19 federal and state banking agencies.
Wouldn't it be easier just to go out and buy a bank?
We looked at that, but the prices are too expensive, and we'd be stuck with all their legacy issues.
So we have to make our own mistakes.
But then we'd have nobody to blame but ourselves. We'd have nobody to blame but ourselves.
No, you're blaming yourselves. Here comes
That is the stupidest thing that I have ever heard.
Oh, God.
We're sick of the stank of the big mega banks, so we'll start one. It's absurd. What a terrible proposition. Like convincing the world to eat kale. What possible
dolly.
fate will become of our bank other than to diminish and fail?
And they diminished and failed. The FDIC came in and took them over, as well as SVB. With more on this, let's welcome back our very good friend Jim Iuorio, analyst for Fox Business and the host of the Futures Edge podcast. And also the proprietor of Brant's and Palatine. Good morning, Jim. How are you?
Good morning, Amy. I'm very good. Thank you.
So real quick, because we got to get this out of the way. The NCAA starts today in full force. Are you opening early to accommodate any of these basketball fans?
Well, we open at 11, and we have on Fridays, there's this one group of about 20 guys who every year comes in and watches it and turns the whole bar into kind of a ruckus thing because everyone starts watching it with them. So if you're around on Friday, starting at about 11:30, we're gonna be hopping.
I might take you up on that. Having a bad week, and that might be good. What burgers should I get, by the way?
I would get the Sunrise Burger, the one with the egg and the bacon on top. I think you'll like that one.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So for us pedestrians, I'm not an intellectual guru like Dan Proft is. Can you walk us through how did SVB and Signature Bank New York collapse?
Well, they're slightly different stories. Let's start with SVB because it's a bigger deal. Okay, for this story starts 40 years ago, so I'll make it really quick.
No,
40 years ago, we had the boom of the economy, when Reagan came into office and deregulated and opened the door to taking advantage of cheap labor around the world, and our economy started to boom. But this unholy relationship between the federal government and the Federal Reserve began to develop, where every time the federal government would look and see people doing well, they're like, we got to regulate, we got to raise taxes, we want in on this. So they do that, and then the Fed would have to lower rates again to make up for the moronic and almost punitive measures that the federal government take. Now, this back and forth, you can look, this is not just a theory of one guy. You could look at the Fed funds rate going back 40 years and see it on a straight downward path, literally for 40 years till it bottomed out after the lockdowns 2 years ago. But anyway, so we've gotten to this point where we cannot have our economy without rates held inorganically low. And the downside of that is you build up these excesses and stupid behavior like we've seen in SVB Bank and Signature Bank and Silvergate Bank. And all of a sudden, when rates start to go higher, Warren Buffett always uses the notion that when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked. And if anyone who's ever been to a naked beach, that can often be an unpleasant sight, and that's what we're seeing right now. Is that appropriate for morning radio? I hope that it is.
No, it's okay. I lived in Spain.
Okay,
been there.
Okay,
South
good.
Beach.
So anyway, so now we're to SVB. So U.S. Treasuries, particularly long-end treasuries, are the thing that they held, and they held them in an account called hold to maturity, so they didn't have to like declare their losses on them. And remember that the prices of these bonds for the last 2 years have been just heading directly lower, which, by the way, good banks hedge their bond risk. That's one of the things I do. You call us, we put you on a 10-year put spread, and good banks have their rate risk hedged. They thought they didn't need to. I know it's a romantic notion to think it's because they were involving themselves in these, idiotic woke causes that all of us look at. And I like to get drawn into that, to point a finger at them and say you should have been paying more attention to banking. It's probably not completely fair, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's fun. And the reality of it is when Jerome Powell started hiking rates, he was going to do it until something broke. I'm doing air quotes. Well, this is the thing that broke. So this is what happens. You see where the excesses are and who's an idiot, and that's what we've seen. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. But why does the Biden administration say that this is not a taxpayer bailout? Because isn't this a taxpayer bailout?
Of course it's a taxpayer bailout. So they're going to say that, FDIC insurance is going to cover it. And ultimately, every dollar comes back to the taxpayer. Just they think they can put a little layer in between it and call it the FDIC insurance that the banks are paying, but then the banks are charging us the fees. It always comes back to the taxpayers paying it. It's so funny, like in my job, we have to take these anti-money laundering classes every year, and part of the thing is called layering, which means like you put in different levels so people can't see the track of the money, and that's what the government does too. They put in layers called the FDIC insurance. Yes, the taxpayers are paying, and yes, they're trying to shroud it.
Yep. Hey, Jim, how you doing? Good to talk to you again. I got a question. I guess it's a two-part question. How does this bank fallout affect the strategy that the Feds, and what will they do next? And does this begin the discussion of the digital central bank currency? And would you consider that to be a threat too?
So I'm going to start with the second one first. I think absolutely it opens the door. They desperately want the central bank digital currency going, and they talk about it all the time now. This is one of the biggest threats. We saw what happened in Canada. We saw what happened in China. If they move to a central bank digital currency and they oversee every one of our transactions, you can bet your life that if you do something that they don't like, whether it's eat too much meat, drive your car too much, they will threaten to lock down your bank account, and then they will lock down your bank account. Now, that's so absolutely. Both Rahm Emanuel and Nancy Pelosi have said loudly, they look at the camera and say, well, you never let a crisis go to waste, and they laugh. What that really means is you let the chaos of any sort of disruption in markets to assume more power than we ever wanted you to have. When you say it that way, it's not quite as cute. But anyway, so as far as the rate thing goes, you said about Jay Powell, on March 7th, when he testified to the Senate, he talked, all confident about a 50 basis point hike that he was open to at the March 22nd meeting. As of yesterday, the market switched that probability to a zero interest rate hike and eases, interest rate lowering by the summer. That's changed a little bit. Now the market thinks there's a 25 basis point hike at the next meeting, but they still think that they will be lowering rates by the summer. And I know I'm ranting this morning. I'm very sorry.
No. It's good. It's lovely information.
Okay, since 1951, every time the Fed's been on a hiking cycle, they have reverted to an easing cycle within 3 months after the last hike. So if you want to know how often they overdo it.
Okay. Silicon Valley Bank, 2 days before the FDIC took over, they all gave themselves bonuses. Now, who gets bonuses in the middle of March? March 10th, just some random day. So they knew this was coming. Is there any criminal charges that could be placed against them?
Okay, well, that definitely seems, I would like to, because people are pointing fingers and they look at that and they look at the stock sales from approximately a month earlier. Now, the stock sales were on a regular schedule from these executives who didn't interrupt it, which they could have. Now, the bonuses are a different thing. I think that the bonuses should be looked at absolutely, because that, that's not their, if they know that they're doing poorly and the bondholders and the stockholders are about to be wiped out, yeah, I think that should be looked at pretty closely.
Well, there was a line outside the bank, people trying to withdraw funds because they knew. Well, at one point in time, their stock was worth $600 a share, right?
Yep.
And then
That's my belief. I don't know the chart in
And
front
what
of me.
is
but
it
yeah,
at
they were
now?
the darling. They were everyone. They were Silicon Valley Bank.
right.
I know now
Anybody,
that,
anybody who was cool or had a startup.
Yeah.
I think Harry from Prince Harry, he had some money in there. Anybody who was cool or hip, they were in the SVB Bank
Hope he's
because
not
that was
broke,
the
though.
thing to do. So then, what happened at Signature Bank?
So
Of
Signature
New
Bank,
York.
I actually think, okay, this is purely speculation.
Okay,
But I think that Signature Bank's problems weren't as deep as Silicon Valley Bank. But I do think because the government is trying to really lean on crypto and crypto lenders a little more. So I am speculating that they were looking at Signature Bank and Silvergate Bank a little harder than they would at normal banks because they really don't like this growing cryptocurrency thing because, again, it's outside of the government's little circle of control. And I think they were a little harder on them. I think it's really fascinating that Barney Frank's on the board of directors at Signature Bank, considering he's one of the guys who drove us into the dust back in 2008.
I mean, how? Of course, the irony of all that. So, bottom line, will our bank fees go up?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The bank's got to figure out how to make money. So bank fees are going up. A lot of different costs are going up. But I want to add something, too, is that people who have been around as long as I have, you're a bit younger, but you remember the banking crisis in 2007, 2008.
Oh, I remember.
Oh, yeah. I felt it.
I lost my
Yeah,
house.
I
I
felt
remember.
it.
Actually, I had to do
Yeah,
a
you
short
guys
sale of
remember.
my house and took a. Whew,
Right,
let's not talk
right.
about it. Okay.
It was a lovely time, yeah. But anyway, that was what we like to call that systemic, meaning all the banks had the same position on, and all the banks had trades into each other so that if one big one went down, they were dragging others down the hole. This is not systemic. This is more symptomatic. Yeah. Several banks, particularly medium-range banks, will have done this stupid thing and not hedge their bond position, and there will be more problems. But it doesn't have the power, in my opinion, to drag everyone down the rabbit hole with them because the big banks are fine.
Now, Jim, there are economic indicators. I think back, I remember reading a report back in the third quarter of 2022 that the deposit outflows and the deposit costs increases were raising concerns then. I'm sure our economic people out there, the feds, everybody else, Congress, they saw this happening. Do you think they want this collapse to happen to gain more autonomy, more control over our system of finance?
That's a two-part question with an answer to think that they knew it and saw it and knew this was going to happen specifically, I say no, I don't think that that's sophisticated. But to the point of your second question, I think absolutely. That's literally what I think they love the chaos of any potential calamitous economic event because then they can do two things. One, they can effectively point to their opponents and blame them, which they tried to do with Donald Trump. And which is so funny because this is not a regulation, to my knowledge. The regulation that he pulled back was for like community banks, not for bigger regional banks like this. So I don't believe it had anything to do with it. That doesn't stop them pointing a finger. And yes, to your point, John, do I think they will use it to try to take over more powers? Absolutely. Mission creep is gone crazy within government.
Wow. All right. So moving forward, Charles Payne said that, I don't know if you heard him, he was on Fox Business. He said that this isn't a bailout of Silicon Valley Bank. This is a bailout of Silicon Valley. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's interesting, too, because this comes to ethical question. Like if you're these startups, and again, we can be annoyed with the wokeism and everything, but the question becomes, should a depositor be protected? So let's say Brant's of Palatine, my little restaurant in Palatine. We have a lot of money in a small local bank, over the $250,000 protected threshold by the FDIC, and we use it to cover payroll. Yep. And many of these companies are doing the same thing. So the bailout I actually kind of agree with because it's a kind of a weird system where is it every company before they put their $1 million in operating costs in the bank every night, are they supposed to look and see at what every depositor is and notice that every depositor is from the same industry? So when there's a slowdown in that industry, everyone's going to be pulling their money out at the same time. In an ideal world, we say, yeah, they should be watching that, but that's not really that realistic. So I don't mind the bailout of the depositors, but I don't want bondholders, stockholders, executives to be made whole like last time. Yeah, if that happens to me, that'll leave an awful taste in my mouth and many others.
I mean, Silicon Valley Bank, the second largest bank failure in U.S. history. Whew. All right,
Crazy.
Jim Iuorio, let's talk real quickly about the Futures Edge podcast. How can we see it? And what's it about? Let me guess. It's
Okay,
about business.
it's on Spotify and it's on YouTube. Bobby Iacchino, buddy of mine, we started it about a year ago. And the thing that's amazed us is the people who say yes and will be on our podcast. So guess being 20 years on the fringe of media has made some good allies. So Robert Malone was on it, Luke Groman, Danielle DiMartino Booth. We had this week. But by the way, it's probably about 75% macroeconomic. But then we have a guest like Robert Malone to talk about more pop culture things, and we then pretend it's macroeconomic because we wind it into something just to stay with our mandate.
But macroeconomics is so hot. Come on.
Yeah.
No, I know, but you do
sexy.
a great job, and I appreciate and I love your restaurant. Absolutely, cannot sing its praises enough, because that outdoor patio, man. During COVID, I think I was there at least once a week. Because I felt freedom. I would drive from the city because there was no traffic because everybody was locked in their house, and get out in the in Palatine. So check it out for yourself and listen to the podcast. It's called The Future's Edge Podcast. It's on Spotify and YouTube. Jim Iuorio, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. See ya.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Don't defund the police. Hire the police to protect your business. Rising crime has been crippling business owners in Illinois more and more in the past year. Blue Star Security can protect your most valuable asset, your business, to protect both you and your customers. Blue Star Security is the only security company in